Government resilience is such a tricky topic because it has many, many different prongs, many different ways to look at it and approach it, to find solutions. We can talk about education, we can talk about infrastructure, we can talk about what have you under the sun. But I believe that we all have very different and interesting perspectives to share. Ans, maybe we want to start with you.
So what is governmental resilience for me?
How do you approach it? Yes.
So for me, a resilient government would be a government that's able to anticipate, to adapt, and to react to any forms of crisis, and doing so in a way that I also, as a citizen, can trust that the government has basically also my private data in my best interest, because the government is the processor of my data as such.
Very good. That was a wow, and we're done. Great. Jonathan.
Great definition. I would add, well, we're talking about shocks, so anticipating, adapting, and recovering from shocks, and you can have two types, basically, like quick shocks, short impact like COVID, and you can have more slow-burning situations, what's happening with AI, for instance, or the geopolitical situation, so you can have more long-running shocks that you still need to adapt to and to recover from.
Very good. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. From my perspective, from the lens of global diplomacy, particularly reflecting on Africa and the global south, government resilience is the capacity to anticipate. It is also the capacity to respond as well as to evolve amid disruptions. Whether it is cyber disruptions, or whether it is climate shocks, or whether it is economic, or in the current times, the geopolitical environment, it's not just about survival. I must say, it's about transformation. In my opinion, also, in this context, resilience requires innovation and purpose. Using technology to strengthen transparency, accountability, and trust is very, very crucial while we measure systems where people are at the center, and also not institution all the time.
Let's talk about how exactly each of the three of you approach the topic of resilience in your own work. I mean, for example, Ans, Cybernetica is doing some important work in Ukraine. Maybe you want to tell us more about that kind of work.
So, so we've been extremely happy to have been, let's say, the technology partner in the development of Trembita. So our interoperability layer is basically what also runs a lot of it. Of course, we did it with also some partners. And there I think also if looking at also how resilient Trembita from a context has been in regards of the situation that it landed in, I think that also shows a lot on what and why is important from a governmental structure perspective, especially when looking at also similarly that Estonian X-Road is set up. Well, UXP is kind of an involvement of that. It's still a modular way of interoperability, where also the systems do not have really one central point of failure, right? So exactly because of the modularity, you can just kind of remove them from one place, put them also physically somewhere else, and the systems will continue and they will recover. Maybe some individual systems are not accessible at a certain point, be that they are under attack, maybe even have been breached. But that doesn't mean that the rest of the network as such would fail. And I think, let's say for us, it's been also a very exciting opportunity to see how fast all of this evolution has also happened. Because I think if we look, I mean, from my point of view, from a technical standpoint, in order for evolution to happen, you need pressure, right? Because if there's no pressure, you're kind of in a very relaxing point. And obviously, let's say the Ukrainians had, or will still have, a very unpleasant pressure point, and because of that, also the evolvement is just so fast. We can, of course, we can have a long discussion around potential attack vectors or something like that, but I at least also say one of the ideas just that maybe I have is that the fact that it is a closed source, it's not an open source solution, so therefore also it's just another attack vector that has been removed, because if you look also throughout the past years, there are examples of the fact where some unfriendly policies have entered open source software, right? And I think that's just another attack vector that has been removed that also again adds to the resilience as such.
It seems to me like both on the technological and societal level, we're talking about compartmentalization. Like the very first generation of early battleships in the sort of 17th century, they had one hull, and if you breach it, there's one hole, the thing just sinks. And now you've got so and so many different compartments where even if there is a straight hit, it doesn't sink because it just fills a small bit of water in one small bit of the ship. Now, of course, Jonathan, you've mentioned previously already that digital transformation is about a deep organizational and cultural change as well. What do you mean by that, and how does that get worked through in the state of Quebec, which, by the way, has the best flag inside of Canada, we have to say?
Well, thank you. So you can't really talk about resilience without talking about dependency. And talking about culture, before talking about technology, it's behaviors. So we need to evolve in terms of behaviors, especially in the digital space. And one aspect that we are working on is, especially in the current geopolitical context, is dependency on large vendors. We're in North America, so of course we're close to them, both geographically and historically. And while we're still working with large vendors, moving to a more European model of open source, working with European partners in that regard, and making some bold moves and decisions, notably in terms of software development, where we're currently very fragmented, very oriented with large corporation software, and trying to break the large project mindset and have the humility to learn from others, learn from countries like Estonia, like what Ukraine is doing and other partners, and be able to get to that more open future, which should be more resilient, because if you're less dependent, so if a vendor goes under, for instance, then you're still able to operate and still able to evolve your solution and not stuck with, for instance, old legacy software, which can bring problems if there's a future crisis, like we've seen in COVID, we've seen it in the wildfire situation also in Canada, where governments had to roll out solutions very quickly. And if it becomes easy, you have standardized solution, then you can move forward and bring value to citizens much quicker.
It's funny that you went over to the sort of dependency standpoint. So I'm originally from Germany, and the northernmost federal state of Germany, just I believe last or the year before, took the decision to just throw overboard all of Microsoft Office at once. And all of a sudden, all of the people in the workforce in the public sector were like, well, you know, I'm used to using Word and Excel and PowerPoint and whatnot. What the hell am I supposed to do now? I've been doing this for the last 20 years, right? So this is, of course, on a strategic national scale, there's a very clear impetus to become more independent. But at the same time, it's a very big challenge socially in your organization to sort of make clear, like, sorry, it's been really comfortable, but now this is going to hurt for the next year. Is that just how we have to do it? Like, you just have to have that sort of clean cut and make that transition, or is there a way to soften the blow?
You have to soften the blow, because otherwise you're going to run into resistance both internally and externally. So some employees have built careers on their mastery of proprietary software. We have to acknowledge that and respect that. And I don't believe boiling the ocean is realistic, especially in the current fiscal situation. So we have to be opportunistic, going at it project by project, but also give I'd say courageous orientation, say, well, from now on, we will stop doing these large projects depending on vendors. We'll start using open source software. And very interesting what some countries are doing right now, mandating that all new developments must use open source software. But you have to do that without impacting operations, because then if you start hurting services to citizens, for instance, you're going to run into trouble as well. So we have to be very smart and strategic about that and go at it step by step, basically.
It's funny that you should mention the boiling of the ocean. I thought with global warming we're doing a great job, but okay, fair enough. Mr. Ambassador, we've now talked about the sort of dependency with regular technology, if you wish. You have warned personally of a new sort of digital colonialism where AI systems are trained on non-representative data, particular subsets of humanity that are more or less biased towards. We're talking about knowledge, we're talking about languages and cultural assets and so on. How do you approach this topic?
I would say that context is very important, as well as adaptability. We all know that data is, some people say it's the new oil, I say no. Data is the new soil in which artificial intelligence grows. Without data, there is no valuable AI. I think that's very important. If we do not cultivate our own data, which is from the lenses of Africa and the global south, is very, very important. We have to cultivate our own data ecosystem that are culturally and intellectually farmed by others, rather than the other way around. Some of the important policies from the lenses of Africa and the least developing countries is that we have to mandate the creation of data commons. Data commons for public good by making sure that digitization and ethical curation of our local languages and historical archives are central and key, as well as the importance of agricultural data and indigenous knowledge systems. I will also say that localization is also very important. We must prioritize the collection, the curation, as well as the governance of local data in native languages and context. And I think this country is doing a lot of work in making sure that its local language is embedded in its learning models. There's also a need from my lenses for global action. Global action is required. The United Nations, from where I sit, as well as cross-section of multilateral agencies, they must ensure that there is equitable representation. We must have a voice around the table. If not, these learning models will not be truly representative and will influence biases and mischaracterization of outcomes and outputs, and learning models that do not fit for the purposes of developing countries. I will also say that it is important for us to adapt what I call data sovereignty frameworks. This is important from the perspective of making sure that there are regional standards that, for example, the African Union have data policy frameworks that are continental-wide, that are being adopted to ensure that there are safeguards, there are ownerships, and there is responsibility embedded in them.
How can we sort of protect, how can global south countries, governments, protect their own people from some kind of international global company using the local population for classification of data and then just packing up shop and going again? Is there anything that we can do in a regulatory way or anything?
Well, certainly, of course, smart regulation, not at the expense of stifling creation as well as innovation. It is important to have responsive, contextual policy as well as smart regulations in the country. So data governance is very important, making sure that our governments build data infrastructure, not just to follow the AI that has been pushed from the north to the south. We have to build the capacities, we have to build the competencies, we have to build the infrastructure on data that have the necessary guardrails and safeguard mechanisms that are in place so that when partnering and collaboration or engagements are being made, it is made from the lenses of co-creation, co-ownership, as opposed to extraction and just use for use sake without us being the owner. Where we want to see ourselves in this dynamics is our ability to produce and not only consume. And for that, it requires changing the mindset in terms of the policies that are in place and the rules of engagement with our partners across the world.
We're getting very clear and concise answers here, which is why we're doing wonderfully with time management. So I encourage you to ask questions on Slido as well. In the meantime, I still have questions that sort of pertain first to Ans from the private sector side and then to the government side for the other two. When we look at the work that Cybernetica has done, I mean, you've been in Japan and Benin and Ukraine, all around the world, quite literally. Are there some shared foundations that you can sort of apply to all countries? I'm not asking for a one-size-fits-all everything framework. That doesn't exist. We know that. That's fine. But what would you say are the sort of common denominators that you can actually apply? And then vice versa for your two countries that you represent, or regions, provinces. What are the main allies that you see in your field of work? Is there a certain collaboration partner across the border somewhere from whom you have been able to learn or whom you've been able to help along their journey as they're following up in the area of digital transformation? Would be very interesting to hear that, but Hans, go first.
So I don't think that there is kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. I think we especially also as an Estonian company, we are very interested also, let's say, in exporting the Estonian model, right? But it always has to have also local cultural adoption. So the fact is certain that there is no other country where we will have an identical tax declaration system as we have in Estonia, because this is ours that we have built for the past 25 years. I think if you ask currently on what we see, I think we see very clearly that from 10 years ago to today, there has been a huge evolution. Doesn't matter on the country or on the region where we go to, right? So if we look, for example, where we started in Benin in 2017 and where they have come now, or if I just look to the fact that I was now just 2 weeks ago on the Ivory Coast to kick off the interoperability project there, I mean, it's fantastic to see how far a country has come, right, in regards on saying digitalization is a priority for us, right? But obviously the singular fact there mainly is that a lot of the ministries and a lot of the organizations have built their own digitized solutions, which work and think in silos. And this is exactly, I think, also where we, with the interoperability kind of layer, can come in and help. So it's not the fact that I first have to go to the Interior Ministry's application to get the certificate, which I then upload to another ministry to the fact, right? But really to interconnect this, and this is then where also citizens can really kind of start grasping the benefit of a, let's say, digital working government. I understand that a lot, many kind of take Estonia as, well, we are, today we can say we are at 100% from a perspective of digital government services. But I mean, you have to understand also, we've been on this journey for 26 years, right? So it shouldn't be kind of a thinking that, you know, I take now some money and 6 months and I will be there. No, because there's a lot of policy change also that needs to happen. And it's ultimately also a lot of mindset change that needs to happen, because ultimately we are not also, if we go, we are not the experts in regards of building your digital services, right? So we can kind of, I think in Estonia, as we're also quite simple people, we have this saying, you know, that we can bring you the fishing rod and we can teach you to fish, but you still have to kind of pull it out yourself. And this is, I think, also a little bit the model that we work on, is that we bring the interoperability layer, we show you how services can be built, but ultimately the local citizens are the experts in regards on what are the services that need to be built. And of course, we can help to prioritize, right? So I'm always a big fan kind of on having high impact changes, right? So that people can see something changed, right? So somebody, I don't know, something that used to take me 30 days, right? Maybe sell a car, I had to kind of sign 5 papers, send them to 10 different places. and now it just takes me 3 minutes, right? So there's obviously a huge change. And this is also something that ultimately will get a lot of local political buy-in to kind of support and continue on the activities, right?
Yeah, the sort of life cycle of a politician is really, really tricky because you have to effectively work around those 4-year instances or 5 years in some countries.
And you can only hope that you start in the beginning of the cycle, right?
Yeah, never happens, never, like literally. I remember when I was working in the Estonian government and sort of explaining the Estonia story, and you would have countries, representatives, prime ministers, and so on, from smaller countries, bigger countries, more federal countries, less federal countries, and they're like, well, we can't possibly learn anything from Estonia because it is smaller, bigger, more federal, whatever. And that was sort of scary because, well, you can actually point quite easily at the data and say, for every type of country, there is one country at least that has done a pretty good job, you know? So like you being smaller than Estonia and just having like a Caribbean island of 100,000 people, that's not an excuse not to be good at this. If you're very big and very federal, that's not a good excuse to not be good at this, right? So usually you can find somebody who is a trailblazer like you and who has walked this path at least a couple of years ahead of you. So what is it for Quebec?
Well, I think it dovetails with citizen expectations, because not too long ago, when you talk about government digital transformation, it meant you could send an email to your government and get an answer back. Wow. And then still send faxes, and then eventually a website. And then we started having transactional websites, and it was great, and you could stop going in line to a service center somewhere or send mail. But then COVID happened, and we started seeing the acceleration of digital transformation in the private sector. And for a citizen now that's used to doing a FaceTime call half across the world, starting a TV show on the phone, then on the tablet, then on the TV, having to still transact with the government using faxes or having to wait in line, there's a clash there for sure. So the expectation level has changed. And when we see countries like Estonia, and I think Minister Pacosta stated it earlier, that now it's 100% digital services. So it's this ideal that shows it's possible for an administration to do that. So it's always an inspiration, but it always depends on where you're starting, what's your legacy in terms of systems and jurisdiction and so on. But it shows a path forward at the very least, and that's what's very inspiring for us.
It's funny that you should mention you've repeatedly mentioned COVID now as the sort of big catalyst, and of course, COVID was a big situation in Estonia, just like anywhere else. But from a digital government development perspective, the only two things that I connect to that development was, oh yeah, that's when they put buying and selling a house online, and then the whole marriage divorce thing was sort of kicked off during that time. Everything else was already there. So like for us, it was somewhat easier to handle than for some other countries. So talking about resilience as well.
Yeah, and maybe I'm a bit traumatized, but I was in the front lines when we had to roll out the health card in Canada very quickly, and without, I think, the right foundations to do it in a more efficient manner. So we had to really roll it, and it was a success, and Quebec was able to share what it developed with other jurisdictions. But that's where it taught us a lesson saying, hey, for the next crisis, if we could have like a modern, efficient development platform that makes it easy to roll out solutions, easy to share them, then we'll be a lot more resilient for the next crisis. So that's one of the lessons learned, and that's what we're working on right now to ensure that we don't have to start from scratch when the next crisis comes in. That's resiliency. Yeah.
Mr. Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think from the lenses of Africa and the Global South, there is an underlying reality, which is the challenges of the digital divide, as well as the big issue of connectivity. You cannot really harness the value that is expected without closing meaningfully the digital divide and making sure that connectivity is universal, continuous, secure, and ubiquitous, which is a big issue that hinges on the coherence of the policy and the commitment of government policy and investment around building truly data and digital infrastructure in the country, making sure that we can leapfrog from the legacy systems that exist elsewhere. We don't have a legacy that we have to unpeel. So the resilience, some of the risks that resilience may pose when you have legacy system, we can bypass that by ensuring that we have sustainable, responsive, agile data and digital infrastructure where connectivity, as well as not only connectivity, because connectivity exists, but is it adequate enough to be able to use the tools and services that are needed to run government, to deliver services, whether it is health, whether it is agriculture, whether it is social services. The other important element for us is also the lack of adequate competencies and capacity. So training is very important. Establish not only educational programs at the university level, but from pre-primary throughout the educational continuum to ensure that mindset are shaped, capabilities and capacities are embedded in a way that our young people will be able to produce. The good news is there's a lot of talent that exists in the continent of Africa and in the global south, and increasingly are embracing and adopting these technologies. And it's a huge opportunity for partnering between South-South within the pockets that are maturing within the continent, as well as North-South relationship. And I agree with the point that you've made. It's not, you can't cut and paste. Things have to be adapted, things have to be appropriated, but where we want to be is to move away from the narrative of before, where things are given to us in silos and we just use. We want to be able to co-create, we want to be able to co-design, we want to be able to co-own the infrastructure and the technology, as well as in the creation of knowledge. There is enormous content creativity across Africa, for example, which can work its way into other parts of the world on a win-win scenario and situation. So from our lenses, it is important that partnering are meaningful, are adaptable, and are responsive, and are contextualized to enable us not only to build resilience, but to build capabilities around them. I will say that we have to also look at how we invest in digitalization. To digitalize truly and meaningfully is not cheap. And we know the realities of most of the countries in the global south. So there are other externalities that need to be resolved so that the commitments of our governments and the partnering move away from just aid and receiving to more of a partnering and co-investing. It's not just about giving us the technology or transferring the technology, but be able to share and harness the enormous creativity that exists amongst the youth across Africa, and to harness the emerging startup environments and partnering them with startups in Estonia and in Europe. And lastly, the point of interoperability, I think, is very, very important as we begin to think about, from our lenses, issues around data and digital sovereignty, as well as governance of data and governance of AI. Without these being taken seriously, it will be very important for truly digital transformation to take root in a meaningful way. We cannot copy. We have to ensure that these are homegrown, utilizing the talent that exists through meaningful partnering and collaborations across the world, particularly in Europe.
Your previous point, I mean, the very last point is very well made and taken as well. Your previous point about connectivity sort of resonated with me, because it's not just about the connectivity that exists, but also whether it's affordable. Then when it does, even if it is 100% ubiquitous everywhere, can I actually afford it? I just got back from a consultancy in Guatemala where 60 gigabytes of internet mobile are $60. Well, if you have these kinds of prices in a country that does not have the highest GDP per capita in the world, it starts to get tricky for people. So the question is also how exactly, what are the KPIs by which we measure digital transformation success, right? Going back to your last point on co-creation, co-ownership, we have a wonderful question from the audience, and thank you to those that are using Slido. I can see several questions here actually, and this question is to all three of you, but I will start from this side this time. How do you know that a government system or a service is resilient? So, like, are there any standards, guidelines, international recommendations, and so on? How would you do it?
Would you know?
So how would you know whether a government system or service is resilient? Is there a checkbox? Or?
Well, it's not one answer. I would say that from the government point of view, the regulatory agencies are very important because each of our governments have a public regulatory agency that regulates and monitors the digital infrastructure and utilization. I think effective monitoring and evaluating can send us signals towards whether we are measuring accurately and whether there are vulnerabilities. We see that in the cybersecurity environment, where most of our countries are building national cyber infrastructure to be able to monitor vulnerabilities. And there are regional collaboration activities that share talent and that share intelligence and resources with the national SAT systems as well as the regional SAT systems. With that, one country will be able to be on top of vulnerabilities and respond to that. The other point is policies that are in place, not on paper, but policies that are designed effectively to be responsive and to be able to monitor, to evaluate, and to do appropriate diagnostics. The last important element is the talent base in the country, not only at the technical level, but at the policy level in government, and how integrated the infrastructure is. If the infrastructure are in silos and there is no coherence in terms of how adoption is made, that exposes risks and vulnerabilities. And when you have weak infrastructure that is utilizing equipment or infrastructure that are more prone to risk, it also exposes and create vulnerabilities within the country.
Yeah. In the previous panel, we also talked about government procurements, which can be a very good sort of trigger to do this. Jonathan.
Well, when you talk about resilience, you talk about two things. So is the government resilient, meaning that during a crisis or a shock, can you still offer services and do so transparently? The second one is a bit trickier. Because if you can maintain democracy in a crisis, still offer services, then you're at the right place. And if you look at technology, you've got like the technical side that's pretty standard and well documented, so availability, integrity, and you also have integrity. But what's interesting is with the cloud vendors, who owns these metrics now? So if you outsource everything to big multinationals, you don't own these metrics anymore. You can't touch the server, it's somewhere else. You might not even know where it is. And what we've seen is, and they sell that as a selling point where, don't worry, we're going to take care of that, you can handle your operations. And then stuff like what happened with The Hague comes up, where it's not just the Cloud Act where a foreign government can go snoop through your data, they can cut access. So, and the paradox is that through COVID, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but we've accelerated our move to public cloud because it was convenient at the time. It was a right decision. But now we're faced with a situation where they can hike up prices, they can cut access, because if the geopolitical system or context becomes more problematic. So we're faced with these tough choices. And I'd say that the other aspect for resiliency is how quickly can you pivot. So another crisis happens, a problem happens, are your system able to adapt quickly? So if you're tied up with foreign vendors, for instance, you can't touch anything, change anything, then you are not resilient, really. And the, say, devil's bargain that's in front of us right now is moving back the clock, if you will, or moving to a more self-sufficient model. While you're doing that, you're not necessarily improving citizen services. So it's a very tough dilemma right now we're faced with.
I mean, if governments would take a very hard look at themselves right now and say, how independent are we truly today? I think it's not a very pretty picture for most of them, especially if you look at the most technologically advanced, because you have international trade, you have international specialization, so like it makes sense to purchase the best stuff from all the best countries, but yeah, that's the situation that you end up with. Hans?
I just maybe wanted to quickly reflect on this. How independent are you really? I think it's more about also how well do you trust the partner that you have chosen, right? And this is then also maybe the decision that you can or should potentially also revisit if you're, let's say, struggling with wherever you are due to, let's say, follow-ups of previous decisions as such. Because I think especially also as a small country, right, like Estonia is, we can never think from a perspective that we do not have any, let's say, private companies helping the government, because this is ultimately also how the Estonian e-Estonia journey was born, was exactly through public-private partnerships, because the government also said very clearly that we cannot do this alone and we need to, let's say, involve the private companies in it. So therefore, let's say, saying that private companies are bad, I wouldn't be maybe 100% with that idea. But again, coming to the idea of
saying that.
Okay, sorry, that maybe sounded a little bit like the perspective that unless I have all the developers, all the code, everything with me, then I cannot control it. I think it's more about, like I said, about the partnerships that you build and about the trust that there is. But again, saying from a resilience perspective, of course, there are a lot of technical metrics, I think, towards systems that you can also measure, but I much more like to use it maybe also to simplify it to myself as a citizen, right? So can I get the things done that I want to get done when I want to get them done, right? And that means that the service is resilient. And I mean, if I look now even a step further, I always kind of imagine of a perspective that when looking at the future of, let's say, interoperability, or let's say of the future of government services, I think the best governments, from my perspective, would be the ones I don't even need to interact with, right? That maybe, okay, once a year, I need to go put the signature on my tax declaration, but everything else comes to me because I am allowed, I'm entitled, whatever. It's not the other way around, that I need to go request now, for example, for a new driver's license, right? Because it expires. No. The government, they know your driver's license expires, and you just get an information here, we're about to give you out the new driver's license. Do you still want it, right? And if, then you will get it, right? So, and not that I have to kind of go request, but that it's really kind of proactive government services. And this is what I am especially excited on if I look now more from a future perspective in regards on where we are also going with the systems and with the developments and the opportunities.
It's time for closing remarks. 3 sentences each. Yes?
Actually, I was just going to add to the point about trust.
Sure.
I think the trust goes beyond just private sector partnering. I think citizens' trust is very, very important increasingly in the era of digital governance. I think trust is critical for accountability, for transparency, to ensure that the ethics of the systems are in place to protect human rights and dignity of the larger population. Without it, vulnerability doesn't mean anything. If the citizenships are vulnerable for lack of inclusiveness and their trust of the systems that are intended for them, then vulnerability has a challenge.
We've got an angry blinking light at us. Last couple of thoughts.
Well, community favors resilience, I think. So as human beings, we're used to working in communities. So I think, especially in the digital realm, like events like this are extremely important. And building these networks, when something bad happens, if you've got friends, it gets a lot easier.
Hans?
Yeah, I think like also the topic was here, let's say, innovation to resilience. I think it's kind of, it works 2 ways, exactly, right? So that when you're under pressure, you get kind of pressed to innovation, which then kind of, again, adds resilience. And I think, therefore, it's quite an exciting time as a technologist to be around to see, let's say, how, where, and what is evolving, and quite excited in regards to what comes forward after that.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you. Please join me in thanking them and put your hands together. Thank you so much.